morning. I hope everyone can hear me okay. Nyal Fuentes. I work at the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. So I'm going to start talking about college access writ large a bit here. Financial benefits of higher education, why we're trying to get all students, but particularly aiming at our immigrant population. In Massachusetts, if you are from Massachusetts, we have a fairly diverse immigrant population. We have a lot of Latino students, but Latino students from a lot of different places. Traditionally, they were Puerto Rican. I know they're not, they're migrant more than immigrant students, plus a lot of Dominicans, and recently a lot of students, I'm sure a lot of you coming from that Northern Triangle piece, that kind of area of Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador, where a lot of kids are coming from, slave kids who haven't been in school, kids are doing all that. We've also had a lot of newcomers around coming from Haiti and other places, like a lot of you have. So and a lot of different kids from a lot of different Asian countries as well, and Africa. So kids from all over the world coming to different cities, following those traditional settlement patterns that immigrants have in mostly our urban areas, but also going into what we call low incidence districts, where it's been a struggle for districts where you get 25 Afghani kids in a small seaside community, and they just don't know what to do. So getting into the college piece, I mostly work on college and high school type stuff. This is why Massachusetts has a high level of education. If people want to have family sustaining wages here, they really need to have a high level of education. So this is kind of just a quick view of kind of nationally what it looks like, and we'll share these slides with y'all as well. In Massachusetts, we have what's called wage data. So we're actually connecting actual kids. Actually, these are adults now. So these are 2010 high school graduates. So it's kind of showing you in Massachusetts as a 50th percentile. If we're talking about family sustaining wages, folks need to start thinking about bachelor's and even advanced degrees to really get those kind of higher level earnings to support a family in the Commonwealth. And again, with immigrants coming, and a lot of immigrants who come, and actually Massachusetts it's very variable. That's a dumb way to say it, but it's variable. We have kids that in some communities that are coming with a lot of education and doing quite well in school and accessing higher ed. Other kids are coming with very low level of English proficiency, very low level of education, often undocumented, where it's been a little bit more of a struggle. When we collect data, we have a system called SIMS, which is Student Information Management. So we do collect data from all our schools and districts. We do collect some immigrant data. For those of you familiar with Title III in schools, we do some small immigrant grants, and basically immigrant is described in Title III as the first 3 years kids are here. We're trying to really define that as newcomer students. We do not have data around college going for those students. It's just for a lot of schools and districts, it's a very small number. And the reporting around that has been kind of suspect because remember, the people who are gathering these data, they don't know if students have been, were immigrants 4 years ago or they were coming from New York. So it's been kind of spotty. But just to give you an idea here about what's happening in Massachusetts, and this is terrifying to me, is these numbers are dropping all across the board for students immediately attending college. So this is why we really want to pay attention to this. That kind of blue line on the bottom is Latino students. We know Latino students are not all immigrant students. We have had a Puerto Rican population, for example, in the Commonwealth since probably the 40s and 50s. So 4 generations of Puerto Rican kids have been here. And then in that group, again, none of these groups are monolithic. You can really see a big drop here that we really need to work on, are concerned about. We also know only about a quarter of our Latino high school students are English learners. So we know that there's a lot of different stuff going on. Again, in this group, this is by other student groups. I want you to pay attention a little bit to that yellow line on the bottom. That's talking about English learners. Again, not all English learners are immigrants, but most immigrants are English learners. So that's something when I'm thinking about immigrants, I'm really following that line, even though a lot of those kids might be Puerto Rican kids or other kids that are born in the United States. They just, can't access all the curriculum in, the federal definition of what used to be called LEP, we're calling English learner. So that's kind of overall data here. A little bit about, we're really concerned about boys too. So again, these are all kids, not just immigrants, but we're really concerned about our boys and how, low their immediate college attendance is as well. A couple more slides, and I'm gonna hand it over to my much more distinguished colleagues. We do have kind of a little bit of initiative around newcomer students, really focusing on that. Again, a lot of our kids are coming in. We want to make this definition here of what newcomer was, which if you work in a really complicated, complex institution with lots of lawyers and lots of different stakeholders, it's hard. So even putting together this little slide was somewhat of a victory. We've been working with Brown University and a group over there to kind of research some of our newcomer outcomes. I don't have that for you now because we're not done with that. So hopefully, or maybe if we come back next year or whenever you do a session, we'll have a little bit more information. I can invite my friend Dr. Pape from Brown to kind of present that data, because we really want to look at the income of the outcomes of what some of these newcomers are. And they've done some real digging and forensic type stuff to figure out who these kids are. Using our data sets and language and things of that nature. But again, this is like speaking to the converted a lot of time. A lot of kids are coming from these different groups and can access services in a different way. We know for our undocumented kids, things are really hard. For kids to come with refugee status, I know it's easier for refugees because that sounds ridiculous, but they have certain rights under Massachusetts and federal law to access work and higher education and financial aid, especially, where a lot of our undocumented kids do not. So that's something we're really starting to think about. We're trying to give guidance and do webinars for the field, particularly again in places that are low incidence. If kids come to Boston or Lynn, for example, which are, if you're not familiar with Massachusetts, you're probably familiar with Boston, but certainly Lynn, for example, has, they've had immigrants for 150 years, new groups coming in, every generation, a new group of students and people come in. So they're kind of used to that. A smaller community is going to struggle a little more, even though the numbers are smaller. So we want to be able to support them and make sure they know the law. So to make sure they know that they have to serve those kids in high school, regardless of citizenship status or immigration status in Massachusetts public schools. Colleges become a whole different piece. Here's some stuff. And again, there's a couple of links here you can see to kind of some FAQ that I worked on with some other folks around supporting newcomer kids in general. Again, I'm giving the general view. Andrea is going to jump into the college piece. And around 2024, because this is pretty exciting. Again, this is for all kids, but for the first two bullets, for those kids, for those 12th graders, because we're not sending kindergartners to college yet, there are the highest levels of state funding for Pell eligible kids in the history of Commonwealth. If we get a budget passed, we're still waiting in the Commonwealth for our budget to pass, which is supposed to start July 1st. But in both the state and Senate budgets, there are pretty high levels of funding for Mass Grant and Mass Grant Plus, which is again funding for our Pell eligible, our poorer kids. For those students who are documented and can access higher education, it's a really great opportunity to get a pretty affordable public education on the higher ed level. So this is great new stuff. Talking about $30 million more dollars, really closing the gap in affordability for our poor kids, which is great. And then this other piece coming out of the budget that's exciting to us is this Mass Reconnect. And this is for students over 25, but I always like to think of this as when families come, you have the K-12 and usually have parents who might not have that level of education either. And in Massachusetts, where you do much better with a certificate, associate's, or bachelor's degree financially, we're going to be providing almost free access for students over 25 who choose to enroll in community colleges. This is pretty much, I think this is going to happen, even though the budget, they're messing around with what's called conference committee with the budget here to figure out what it looks like with the final numbers. But these are two great things going to happen around affordability in a state that traditionally has fairly expensive public education. So this is great. And then something we're being really behind most of the rest of the country, including some states that we would consider less advanced socially than us, is we have had out-of-state, basically international tuition for undocumented kids. So there is language in the budget that will allow for in-state tuition, not financial aid necessarily, but at least it cuts the cost if students are able to access other financial resources for undocumented. So hopefully that's going to happen. Hopefully this happens next week. And we have really good news about college access kind of on the really highest levels. And that's what I got on the highest level. And I'm going to turn it over to my colleague here who will talk about actually what we do with kids.
Great. Hi, everyone. So glad to be here. Normally I'm at my school, but today I'm at home. So if you hear a dog barking, that's what that is. Let me go ahead and share my screen. Great. Can everyone see that okay? I think that's a yes. Great. So I have only about 15 minutes, but I want to start off with 3 grounding best practices. This is geared toward anyone that's working with pretty much any high schooler that's wanting to go into post-secondary education training program, just planning for their post-secondary life. So what I'm hoping to do is share these 3 grounding best practices. This is a little bit theoretical, but my slides will hopefully also give you some of the concrete within each of the 3 grounding best practices. You kind of need both when you're working with this population. I think I resonated with someone said in the chat, no one size fits all. And so I think, especially for this population in the college planning process or post-secondary planning process, it really is about getting everyone in the organization, in the school, just having a baseline understanding of the immigrant population. And so I heard some people also say it's not just L or ESL teachers that should be up to date, but also every counselor, every general teacher, advisor, administrator should have a sense of the general landscape. And then that will help them get a grasp on the local landscape. This will impact how your counseling office or your coaches or advisors are providing targeted support. The schools that we suggest to our students in East Boston are going to be very different than the ones someone might suggest in Springfield or in Worcester. So it's critical to kind of get that sense. My second best practice is that self-disclosure is really important in schools or for any teenager that is working with a trusted adult to plan for post-secondary education in order to maximize resources and time for the college applicant students. Like, even if they're not undocumented, they're immigrants, so they may therefore have a non-citizen status, as you all know, or come from a mixed status family, which will, in a lot of cases, impact their financial aid process. And then thirdly, talking about immigration, especially around college applications, should be something that educators are really open about, really open. So myth busting at every opportunity. Students are always watching, they're always listening. And so if all your counselors, all your advisors, teachers are dropping, hints about anyone can go to college, regardless of immigration status. They hear those messages, even if it's not coming from the college counselors in particular. And then this last one, no answer is better than the wrong answer. I train a lot of counselors across the state, and a lot of them say, Andy, I'm always so afraid of saying the wrong thing, so I just don't say anything at all. And when we're talking to students about their process, we have to get really creative, especially if they have maybe they're an asylum seeker, refugee, or they have DACA or TPS. Their college application process is not going to be linear, like, say, a citizen's process might be in terms of the application piece. And so it's going to get zigzaggy. It's going to be really tricky. And if you're a trusted adult that can look a student in the eye and say, you know what, I don't know that answer, but I'm on this journey with you. We'll figure it out. I'll make sure we get an accurate answer for this. That means more to a student, an immigrant student, than trying to get a glossy answer that may or may not be right, just because you're put on the spot and you're an adult, and maybe adults should know all the answers. So being vulnerable can really go a long way in this process. And so, yes. And so for the first one, I want to just touch upon one particular piece. If you're modeling speaking about immigration, that's going to help students own their story and their voice, and their story is their superpower. But I want to be really clear to not immediately encourage them to write about their immigration journey in their college essays if they're not ready to. But do have a conversation with them, especially if you are a trusted adult. With a little processing, they might want to include some of this in their application. Perhaps they've learned something about themselves, or they want to talk about their family's resilience through this and a particular moment that they remember. The recent Supreme Court ruling on affirmative action is going to impact how students present themselves, especially in their essays. Justice Roberts, I believe, wrote in his last paragraph of his opinion that that if a student shares something that showcases a struggle, resilience, and it happens to have something to do with race. A lot of immigration stories have to do with ethnicity or race, that it could be considered or can be considered in the admissions process. So TBD on how colleges are going to be looking for other markers of a student's identity. So when I say TBD on this, TBD, but I don't want to encourage counselors to automatically assume that, and I'm going to be a little coarse, trauma porn is what the colleges want. That is not what is right for the student. And so I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but just wanted to bring in that sort of most recent update in my world, which is the affirmative action decision. And so even sharing these slides with your counselors, your advisors, teachers, wherever you work at school, organization, is just really, really important. And so everything that Nyal shared, Mira also has some great, the Massachusetts Immigrant and Refugee Advocacy Coalition has some great facts and figures. I personally love to check out the Higher Ed Immigration Portal. They have a lot of informative figures. There's something like, according to Mira, 4,100 students who are DACA eligible in Massachusetts. TPS holders, about 17,000. They're all getting in-state tuition. What about everyone else of the almost 2 million immigrants in the state? And so it's really important that your teachers, your counselors know just how important it is to get immigrant students to actually pursue their path. And as you know, if a student is an immigrant looking to go into the college application process, even if they're not undocumented, they might have one of these different statuses that you, I'm sure, have all heard of. And so it's not the admissions piece that gets trampled on, it's the financial aid piece. It's what these statuses can or cannot provide students in the financial aid application process. Some of these statuses grant the holder a green card or a permanent resident card. Some grant them an employment authorization card. That in and of itself is two different buckets for financial aid, which I know Nyal alluded to. And so as you are working with students, and I'm going to head into my second point very soon, but self-disclosure matters, because the earlier that someone that's working with a student knows what status they have or might not have, or what status their parents have, the more targeted our resources can be. And so I hear stories of advisors at high schools working with seniors who in March of their senior year are sitting down to do a FAFSA, and they realize, oh shoot, the student doesn't have a social security number. And then that FAFSA meeting gets derailed, of course, because then it's an entirely different situation that they're having to deal with in that moment. That shouldn't be happening in March of senior year. That should be happening maybe at the beginning of junior year, at the end of junior year, where you're having kind of honest conversations. And we'll talk a little bit about self-disclosure. But both of these cards give the holder an A number. That's the antiquated form or way to call that number, which is still present on the old FAFSA. But students who have the employment authorization card, and if you as a counselor physically see this card, you may have to have a conversation of, shoot, sweetie, you can't apply for federal aid, but I can tell you what you do qualify for, which is in-state tuition, for example. If a student does want to advocate for in-state tuition at a Massachusetts public college, all paperwork should be submitted to the admissions office, not the financial aid office. And so for DACA, TPS, they all have the employment authorization card. There are only about 12,000 people eligible for DACA. So the pool is running out. It's really the other statuses that we're seeing come through at my high school, the TPS statuses, or the asylum pending book crew. That we have a whole community of families that have asylum pending. They all get issued employment authorization cards. And the earlier we know that, the earlier we can talk to them about other options other than FAFSA. And so I do need to move this along, but let me move on to number 2, which is why self-disclosure is so important, especially if a student might be a citizen might still be an immigrant student, but maybe their family, their parents are undocumented. This will impact the financial aid process. I did link a plug for this free webinar on the MIFA Institute if you want to do a deeper dive on statuses and how it impacts financial aid. This is the webinar that Nyal had sort of cited earlier, but please prioritize having a family meeting as you're post-secondary planning with a student, because in those meetings, even if they're not self-disclosing to you, you can always ask, hey, is there anything else you want to share with me? Anything that might allow me to help you in your process? And once that trust is established, families might tell you, hey, you know, actually, we just immigrated. We have we're waiting for our status to come through. How can you help us? So self-disclosure needs to happen, but want to be so clear that educators can never ask a student or family what their immigration status is. Don't do it. It is not legal. But once they self-disclose, it is green light. Bring it up whenever you need to. Once a student tells you that, there are no boundaries regarding what type of conversations you can have. But always avoid writing emails, especially to colleges with sensitive information. Always phone call it or face-to-face it when necessary. And so another way that I get, or it sounds manipulative, but I don't mean it this way, but another way that I get students to self-disclose is to make sure that they know that our office is friendly to immigration, to immigrant students, to undocumented students. And you can do this virtually with a Zoom background, with newsletters, anything that you do. Again, they listen, they hear, and if they know that you might be someone they can trust, they will self-disclose. And so once a student self-discloses, then you are able to assist them by saying, hey, let's find out what you are eligible for. They're not a permanent resident, they're an eligible non-citizen. And if they're an eligible non-citizen, they might have a green card and can apply for FAFSA. If they're not an eligible non-citizen for FAFSA, they might have an employment authorization card. So what this means for the old FAFSA is that students with a social security, only students with a social security can apply. In the old FAFSA, I keep saying old FAFSA because you might have heard that the FAFSA is getting a new look and a revamp come December. And so we are promised that there might be a separate form or process for parents who don't have social security numbers to be able to create some sort of FSA ID, which currently they're not allowed to do if they don't have a social. So if a parent doesn't have a social on the old FAFSA, they would just put in all zeros in the FAFSA. The new FAFSA promises to make it a little bit more or a little easier on them. I have my doubts. I don't know if an undocumented parent will feel more comfortable filling out an electronic form versus just sending a signature page, but TBD on that. And then I'm going to leave it right here, but my number 3 best practice is talking about immigration with your students in your counseling office. There is no federal law, myth bust. If you want to screenshot this and print it out for your office, but make sure that you're really being intentional about what colleges you're referring students to. Chances are they have a DACA or undocumented student space that they're really, really immigrant friendly, and encourage your students to be honest about immigration status. Colleges are prohibited from releasing information unless under court order, and FERPA is really strict about this. In my 11 years working in this field, I've never had a college self-disclose or out a student's immigration status or a parent. So feel free to share that anecdote with your students if it's helpful. But my time is up. You have the slides here, but please start building a community of counselors. Reach out to me if you need any thought partnership with anything. I'd love to be your resource for you.